And then unless you're terribly socialized, and some people are. Some people have no social skills, and so the reason they can't go to a party is because they don't even know how to introduce themselves. Like no one ever taught them how to behave. And so they're really good candidates for behavior therapy, because you walk them through the process of how you actually manifest the procedures that are associated with social acceptability. But most people aren't like that. They have the ability. So if they're really introverted and high in neuroticism, they can usually talk quite well to someone one-on-one. Why? Because they look at them. Well, if I look at you, it's another thing to do if you're ever speaking to a group of people. Never speak to the group of people. That doesn't exist. You talk to individuals, and then they reflect for you the entire group, because they're all entrained. So you look at one person, they broadcast to you what everyone's thinking, and you know how to talk to one person. So it's easy. So as soon as you focus on the person, not you, you push your attention outward, use your eye, you push your attention outward, and you start watching. Well, then all your automatic mechanisms kick in, and you stop being awkward. Because if we're talking and I'm looking here, I don't know what you're going to do next, and I'm going to put disjunctions into they're like bad chords in the melody of our conversation. And the reason is I'm not paying attention. So that's why the eye is the thing at the top of the pyramid. It's like the thing that enables you to win the set of all possible dominance hierarchies is the eye. Pay attention. Pay attention. That's the critical issue. That's why the Egyptians worshipped Horus. That's why Horus was the thing that rescued Osiris from the depths. It's the capacity to pay attention. What do you pay attention to most? What your right hemisphere signals as anomalous. It attracts your attention. It's like, this isn't going quite right. I'm not looking at that. Wrong. That's what you look at. That's what you look at. What's not going right. Because that's the terrible monster that might eat you, but it's also the place you get all the information. So that's why it's useful to have discussions with your enemies, because they will tell you things you do not know. And that's such a great thing, because if you don't know them, well, you're not very smart, are you? You know, there may be a time when you go somewhere that's the thing you need to know. And maybe your enemy will tell you why you're such a fool, you know, and a bunch of other things that aren't true too. But even one thing that's accurate, it's like, yeah, thanks very much, man, maybe I'll do some work on that, and I won't have to carry that forward. So, and then that's part of the reason, again, why the terrible predator, it's always the terrible predator that has the gold. It's like, it's the person who delivers the message you do not want to hear. So it's rough, but it doesn't matter, life is rough. Okay, so how are these specialized? The right hemisphere, operation in unexplored territory. And that unexplored territory emerges whenever what you're doing doesn't work. You know, you can conceptualize it as that which is beyond the walls of the city. But the city is a category structure, abstractly put. There's no difference between the barbarians that invade the walled city and the things that happen in the world that damage your category structure. They're the same thing from a practical perspective. Okay, right hemisphere, operation in unexplored territory, negative emotion, inhibition of behavior. That's this. That's anxiety. That's what happens when the Medusa looks at you. You turn to stone, right? That's the basilisk in Harry Potter. It freezes you. Why? You're moving forward according to a schema. If you're moving forward properly, you're getting to where you want to go, and the schema is being validated simultaneously. I'm moving forward and the map is correct. Something happens that's unexpected. What should you do? Stop. What else are you going to do? You stop first. Then the predator can't see you, right? That's the freezing reaction of a prey animal. So it's built very, very deeply into you. Very, very old circuits do that. In fact, if it's a real orienting reflex to something that's anomalous, you'll go like this. And that's to stop the thing that will jump on your back from carrying out your throat. And that's really, really fast. It's almost as fast as spinal snake reflex circuitry. Extraordinarily fast. And you know, that's conserved over an evolutionary span. That predator defense system is at the bottom of your cognitive apparatus. Everything's been built on that. Like, it's a low resolution pattern. A higher resolution pattern that's the same pattern is built on top of that. then a higher resolution pattern, that's the same pattern is built on top of that, and so on. But that initial architecture is duplicated across the levels of differentiation of the nervous system. And that's partly why these symbols can be so archaic and still be accurate. It's still the way the world works. Negative emotion, inhibition of behavior, image processing. Right, because thing about images is they're fast. You know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay, you get the picture. You know, get the picture is actually something you say to someone if you say, do you understand? Right, to get the picture is very, very fast. So the right hemisphere manages that. Holistic thinking, that's that low resolution thinking that generalizes across instances. Pattern recognition, pattern generation, and gross motor action. Yeah, freeze and get the hell out of there. That's gross motor action. The right hemisphere is very good at that. That's why if you're right-handed, if you're right-handed, you use your left hemisphere to manage the really fine motor details, right? You write with it. You write with it. And because that's very, very, if you're right-handed, you tend to use your left hand to open the top of jars. Right? You use your left hand. That's a gross motor action. I mean, sometimes people are more lateralized than that. But the left hemisphere is specialized for the fine-grained things that you know very well. That's exactly it. Okay, the left hemisphere. Well, the left hemisphere, which is associated with positive emotion, by the way, that's specialized for operation in explored territory. So now what we might say is that you spend your whole life trying not to have your right hemisphere turn on. Because why would you want that? That's where the monsters pop up. So you stay in explored territory, but maybe you also tentatively expand its borders, and the left hemisphere seems to be involved in that too. So if you're curious about something, it's usually something minor enough so that it won't blow your entire category structure if you explore it. Now sometimes you get unlucky and you're like Eve in the Garden of Eden. You go have a little chat with this little snake that seems to be of no significance whatsoever, and it feeds you something, the apple, it feeds you something, and bang, everything falls apart, right? You collapse, and you're out there in history. You're no longer in your old paradise. So, activation of behavior. Yeah, well, that's because positive emotion is associated with movement forward. Like if you're where you want to be and things are going well, then your behavior should be activated so that you go and get things. Now, one of the negative consequences of that is that if you're really in a good mood, really happy, you're going to be impulsive and make mistakes. You know, because you hear these dough-headed, that's a very minor word, people who are always pushing happiness as the key measure for successful existence. It's so ill-informed that it's embarrassing that even happens. Positive emotion makes people impulsive. Maniacs, for example, which is really, that's mania, right? Bipolar disorder. If you're manic, you're one happy person. Way too happy. Everything is great. Nothing but wonderful things that are beyond your imagination are going to happen to you, and they're going to happen fast. And so you're down to the mall to buy everything you can possibly get your hands on because you have 100 uses for everything. And then a week later, you know, you crash into your depressive episode and you realize that you're $150,000 in debt and you've alienated everyone that you know. It's like that's untrammeled positive emotion. So how about no? A pure index of positive emotion is no way of determining whether or not a system is working properly, even your own system. You need a balance between positive and negative emotions. Plus, positive emotions are absolutely exhausting because if you're in a manic episode, it's like, it's time to get everything good right now. Fine, but you won't sleep for a week and then you die because you just burned yourself to a crisp. And so to be overwhelmingly enthusiastic about everything sounds like a real blast, and I've seen full-blown manics and they're having plenty of fun, but it is not a pleasant thing to behold. They're just all over the place, and you know, yeah, it's really not good. It's really not good. You need a balance between these two systems because the whole world isn't explored territory bursting with nothing but promise. That's not the world. The world is that in a bounded space a little bit with an absolute horror show going out around the periphery, and both systems need to be active in order to keep you balanced. People do unfortunately sustain damage sometimes to the left prefrontal cortex responsible for positive emotion, or the right prefrontal cortex, responsible for negative emotion. And if you sustain right hemisphere prefrontal damage, it makes you inappropriately happy and impulsive, and your life just goes, you just spiral downhill, because you make nothing but impulsive decisions. And you know what the real world consequence of that is, you know. You get drunk and be impulsive for one night, you can learn what the bloody consequences of that are. You try living like that for a month, independently of IQ. That's the other thing that's so interesting. You can blow out your left prefrontal cortex and not suffer much of a decrease, especially in crystallized intelligence. But the fact that you're running on nothing but, your right hemisphere, you're running on nothing but positive emotion is going to auger you right into the ground. And then if you're perhaps even more unlucky and you lose the left prefrontal cortex, then you're permanently depressed, because there's nothing but the unexplored manifesting itself. We know that if you take depressed people and you do EEG analysis, that they have predominant resting right hemisphere EEG activation. And so that's roughly, so why is this? Well, unknown territory, known territory. You think, well, is that real? Well, it's real enough, so that's how your brain evolved. That seems pretty damn real. So then we can think about it subcortically, and we might as well do that. This is mapped out on the hippocampus, most particularly by Jeffrey Gray, who is influenced by Sokolov and Vinogradova, who were also students of Luria. Jeffrey Gray used cybernetic theory that was developed by Norbert Wiener, which is an AI, he's the father of artificial intelligence, and some of that was actually integrated as well into Piagetian thought, because Piaget and Wiener, Norbert Wiener and Luria, if I remember correctly, all went to the same conference back in the early 1920s, mid 1920s, and heard Norbert Wiener speak. So that's how cybernetic theory got built into some of these underlying theories and sort of manifested itself everywhere. So Gray uses a model very much like this, derived from cybernetic theory. And so here's the idea. How does the brain work? You have a target in mind. Then you act to manifest the target. You act to transform the world into the target. And then you compare the consequences of your actions to the target. And if they match, then that's a good thing. And if they don't match, then that's where negative emotion comes from. Okay, so how does that work? The hippocampus seems to be central to that. So it detects mismatch. So in the classic behavioral theory, so this would be Gray's theory, you have your expectations of the world, so that would be your model. And you have your sensory input, which is the real world. And then the hippocampus is mapping one onto the other, one from a top downstream, one from a bottom upstream, and saying match, 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 match. And as long as everything matches, then the hippocampus, this is an oversimplification, keeps the subcortical emotional systems inhibited, because you don't need them, except for maybe mild positive emotion to keep you moving forward. If there's a mismatch, that's anxiety. The anxiety system gets disinhibited because it's on, it doesn't get activated, it gets disinhibited. That freezes you, and all the other motivational systems are primed, because God only knows what you're going to have to do next. Okay, so then if you make a mistake given that scheme, you have to modify the world in order to rectify the mistake. You have to modify your motor output so that you put the world back in order. And that's basically Gray's model. But Gray's model is insufficient, because Gray presumes that what you're comparing your expectation with is the real world. But you don't have access to the real world. What really happens is that your brain compares the model of the world that you want to have happen, so it's desired and not expected, with the model of the world that you think is happening. They're both models. There's no direct contact with the truth. And so what that means, and this is what's horrible about this, is that if your model fails, it doesn't only mean that you have to adjust your expectation and change your motor activity. It means you might have to bloody well retool your perceptions. Well, that's a lot more horrifying than just having to change your motor output. If you betray me, then I have to see you differently. And you know, if we've interacted a long time, I've built up a hell of a model of you. You know, it's taken a tremendous amount of effort to generate. And I may have used that model as a predicate for all sorts of other plans, which is what you do with an intimate relationship. And so then if you do something that indicates a true mismatch, it isn't only that I have to adjust my actions. God only knows what I'm going to have to retool. I may even have to retool my perceptions of myself.